for the industrial sector, there are two major disruptions nowadays, which is the climate change and the growing number of people in the world.
First of all, I think it's really great that companies like Shell are challenged by the new startups, because too long they have been sitting in a safe zone.
I believe that being a mainstream company nowadays doesn't secure a mainstream company in 10 or 20 years.
And I believe the new companies that are coming in, they are making sure that our kids, our grandchildren will see the world that we are seeing now.
If we're already so aggressive at the moment about how the world should be and how you should be careful about Mother Nature, just think what it will be like in 50 years.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Disrupt or get disrupted? To me, this seems as though it's today's corporate version of Shakespeare's to be or not to be moment, really, isn't it? Do you suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that a disrupted new business model could bring, or could you take arms against it, and in doing so, perhaps risk losing your footing to new entrants in the market? We're going to be discussing disruption from 2 points of view here, as Priscilla kindly mentioned. On the one hand, from an industrial point of view, and then later on, we're going to be changing the panelists and talking about the disruption in the finance sector as well. Let's talk about, first of all, the industrial sector, though, because a lot of people around the world still don't know how artificial intelligence, new disruptive business models can change things for their employees, shareholders, often asking heads of big listed companies to make sure that they are taking advantage of the new disruptive business models. And obviously, everybody wants something in a different time frame. So I'm going to introduce my two guests here for the next 40 minutes. Bert Hess, here on the left, who is the chairman of LafargeHolcim, which obviously is one of the world's biggest makers of cement. But you're also on the board of various other industries, and I'd like you to bring your expertise there as well. And Charles Holliday, or Chad Holliday, as I should correctly point out, chairman of Royal Dutch Shell, which obviously is huge oil industry player. And as we heard there, you got a little bit of praise on the video as we came in. So let's start out by both asking you each where you think disruption is likely to go in your individual industries. Chad, if I start out with you.
So thank you. In the oil and gas industry, we've contributed to an energy revolution. We're here today because of the energy system. Yet the energy system has failed us in two ways. It's failed us because it's creating environmental impact that within decades will have some devastating impact to our planet. And secondly, we left 1.1 billion people behind that don't have access to electricity as we know it, and we have 2.4 billion people that are going to cook on a stove sometime a day that's going to shorten their lives. So we've got to have disruption to make that change. Historically, if you look at an oil and gas company, you'd say they're not going to make it. That's what the person being interviewed was suggesting. Either because they're so stuck on their old system they don't accept the reality of the need, or they just can't see the differences. So we know it's a challenge, but we're trying to do things quite differently in Shell. Let me just give you one example. So when I joined Shell, I kept hearing about the Shell Tech Works, and I think Peter Vosger actually may have started. It's off campus at MIT in Boston. And I got different definitions of what it was. So I went to visit them. I walked in about 9 o'clock at night. They were still going. I walked around the room, and there were 6 people. And I said, what's your background? Well, if you've worked in oil and gas, you're not allowed. We all came out of the space program. And so I said, okay, what's your jobs? And the first one, I'm the video guy. We don't write reports anymore. We go out and interview people and look at the video. The next person, I'm the poet. We're just too scientific around here. We got to have a poet. The result is, though, they're able to turn out inventions from our basic research at 1/3 the time we've done historically. So a whole different makeup, a whole different way of approaching things is making a difference.
Bert Hess, you're in what is quite a traditional industry. I mean, cement, it's been invented since the Roman times. How do you disrupt something like that, or how is disruption affecting your business?
Well, yesterday evening when we had our drinks, I had to ask a charming young lady, what is actually disruption? What do they mean with disruption? And she said to me, well, look at your hair. You used to have long hair, now you have no hair. That's disruption. So, but joking aside, of course, the cement industry, and we are the largest, by far the largest producer in the world, is a traditional industry. There is not so much disruption, is not so much a topic as it might be in other industries. Yet, of course, cement is limestone, is aggregates, is water, a bit of chemicals. Sounds very easy, but there is also a lot of high tech in our industry. I was recently in Kuala Lumpur, where they're building the tallest building right now in the world. And if you see how they shoot cement 600-700 meters up into the air, they have to put ice cubes into the product so that it doesn't get too warm. This is absolutely high tech. And obviously in that industry, we have to look forward. We have to look what will it be in 20, 30 years. If you look at the urbanization that's going on in the world, where a lot of our products will be used, we have to be ahead of the crowd and really put a lot of emphasis on research, new technologies. We have a large innovation center in Lyon, that comes from the Lafarge side after the merger between Lafarge and Holcim. So it's not just cement, it's not just stone, as you might think. There's a lot of high tech in it as well. And then, as you mentioned, I'm also privileged to be on the board of other industries. Nestle, the food company, totally different world, totally different scenarios when you look ahead 30, 40 years. And I'm a third company I'm familiar with is Sonova, hearing aids. There you have to make sure that you know where the trend is going. Some say hearing aids are getting smaller and smaller. Others say, forget it, they will one day be as big like that and colorful. And the others say, forget about hearing instruments altogether. Cell therapy will take care of that, and there will be no more hearing loss in 30 years from now.
So this is the key thing for so many people in industry, well, and any big company around the world, which basket to put your eggs in. So when you're being told conflicting pieces of information about which way the trend is going to go, how do you make that decision? How do people in industry make that decision? Because obviously it's very expensive to buy new equipment and invest to radically change your processes.
Obviously, you don't know what's 30 years, what's going to be, what the world will look like in 2050. That I have learned in Shell. Chad knows about it, Peter knows it well. I like to work with scenarios where you, in a very disciplined way, look at different scenarios, how the world could develop. And, when you do that, the most stupid remark is when people say, well, you don't know what's in 50 years from now. That's not the point. The point is that you have a disciplined, structured approach with regard to how the world might develop. And then in Europe, for example, investment decisions, you follow these scenarios and you do not deviate. You may be wrong, but history told us, for example, in Shell, history told us that if you have that disciplined approach and look back 100 years, you will find that most of the time that was a very rewarding way to look at things.
Chad, do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, so I just building on the scenario idea. What's unique about that is you get a lot of people's input. So in a major scenario planning project, you might interview 150 people inside your company and 300 people outside your company from all different walks of life. And you put that together, and then you see what's really a range of things that could happen. I think the other thing, back to your question of how you deal with this, that's where diversity is so important. That's where a board of directors is made up of people that aren't the most expert in that industry, but bring many diverse viewpoints. Quite frankly, it came up on the panel earlier, the strength of gender diversity on the board. I find that's very important because there's just a whole different series of questions that come up that have been missed by management sometimes.
Is there a time when you remember during your time that you heard something from one member of staff that ended up really being the trend that ended up being true, but they were a lone voice perhaps and amid all of the noise?
Most of the time.
And you went with that? Can you give us an example of that?
Most of the time. But you mentioned artificial intelligence early on. So as we were talking earlier, it was 20 years ago. I first saw it. I didn't know what it was 20 years ago. But we had a retiring employee who was an expert. And so we were going to train somebody else. And I said, yeah, but when he retires, we'll have the same problem again. So all of a sudden, we put that in artificial intelligence systems. That was so elementary compared to the artificial intelligence systems today. But it's bringing up those different ideas. We have a concept in Shell where we'll bring your fuel to you. So you're at your workplace, we'll bring the fuel to you, we'll check your car and make sure it's okay. That was an idea that came up from sources that we never would have thought, because it looks like it's competing with our existing stations.
When it comes to artificial intelligence, how is that going to revolutionize the oil and gas industry? Or is it already happening in sort of subtle ways that consumers might not necessarily be aware of?
So I think the question is actually broader. How's it going to disrupt the world as we know it today? Because I think that's the real question. It will enhance how we do exploration, understand things. Yeah, I serve on the board of a hospital group in the U.S., 170 hospitals. Now we've been able to take artificial intelligence and look at a tumor and guide that surgeon so much more exactly how much to be taken out in ways he couldn't done before. We found in doing that, if we ever say the artificial intelligence is going to replace the surgeon, they don't accept it very well. But if we say this is an aid to you to do your job better, which is what it really is, it goes down very well. So I think the social acceptance of artificial intelligence is almost as important as the technology itself.
Beat Hess, at the helm of your company here, Franco-Swiss, what about the feeling of resistance to artificial intelligence? At the helm of a big company, do you hear that narrative very often, oh, it's going to take our jobs? And how do you counter that?
Well, of course, I mean, in that industry, you have to cope with things like building information modeling, where you can model a building from start up to the end of its lifetime. You have 3D printing, you have digitalisation that's coming big. Does this take away jobs or change the workforce? It certainly does. But on the other hand, it also creates new opportunities for other people to come in. It's clear.
How easy or difficult is it to communicate that to staff when you've got large numbers of staff here to keep them motivated? But again, they're still asking the question, will one day the factory floor just have robots on it? I'm being extreme, but...
That in our industry is not yet such a topic. We are more, at this point in time, we are more concerned to get the right structure into our group. We just went through a mega merger, you can say. So we are restructuring the entire group. That, of course, has consequences on the workforce. And I'm sure the digitalization, 3D printing, information modeling, and so forth, that will also have an impact. And we communicate that as we go along with the innovation.
Chad, not necessarily just in the context of your company, but as a very senior business figure in the world, how do you view this sort of fear of artificial intelligence among sort of the workforce, and then at the same time balance that with the demands of shareholders saying, well, you know, are you embracing this new technology? Will it yield returns pretty quickly?
I have a lot of interaction with employees at Shell and other companies. No one's ever asked me, is artificial intelligence going to take my job away?
But it is a narrative in the world.
It's going to change the way work's done, as it's been doing for other technologies have. I think the biggest concern I have, you know, just personally looking at it, is being able to see a new technology for its full potential. I'll never forget the day I went to call on the president of Sony, and his desk was totally clear, and he had this big device in his hands, and I forgot what he called it, but it would be now called a GPS. And I said, God, what do you do with that? You know, and he said, well, someday this will be in taxis, and they can find the location better. I said, but I got a map. Why would I need that thing? You know, yeah, I could not see the potential of GPS at the time, and all the things it's done, far much more than a map would ever do to you. It's as we know, it's changed the world as we know it. I couldn't see that. So I think that's one of the most important things, is to somehow, you know, see the technology for all the potential it has. And it's very 3D printing, you know, additive manufacturing now. When it first came out, I said, that's a unique novelty. I didn't think it would really change industry as we know it. So I think that's the biggest challenge for us, is to see which technologies really have the power to change things and embrace them early.
On that note, I want to start taking some questions from the floor, and also remind you that you can tweet me questions at @SantosCNN. While we wait for the microphone to go around, I also want to bring up a question to all of you in the audience. If you have your My Symposium app, you can actually vote on this. And I'm going to be putting this question to both of our panelists now. This is the question, actually, I believe it's a slightly different question we have here, which is, the beauty of technology can be slightly disruptive sometimes. Here we go. It's this, which is the best, oh well. Why don't we take this one anyway? Which political skill set is needed? Which political skill set is needed the most in times of disruption? Is it decisiveness, responsiveness, and adaptability? And I'll save the next question for our finance panelists. So, which political skill set is needed most in times of disruption? Decisiveness, responsiveness, or adaptability? If you want to vote on that, we'll get the views from the audience. Panelists, Bert Hess, what would you say?
All of them.
Ah.
All of them. You know,
in which order?
Well, you have to respond quickly, you have to be decisive, and you have to adapt, in that order probably. And this goes for many forms of disruption. And before the panel, we chatted about other forms of disruption, and I think it's interesting for the audience also to see that disruption is not only new technologies, innovation and so forth. For me, disruption is more. I'm more worried about disruption as a consequence of a crisis, of a sudden crisis. That's where I want to be prepared for disruption, and these three words are certainly also important in that case. Just an example, when Nestle had its crisis with noodles in India, somebody claimed that our noodles were not clean or different ingredients. Decisiveness, did we respond quick enough? The answer is no. Post-mortem showed we could have done it in a much different way. Fortunately, these noodles were then burned in the LafargeHolcim cement plants, tons and millions of tons, you can say. So we could be helpful, LafargeHolcim could be helpful to Nestle. Or when just another example that our chairman here, Peter Voser, knows well, when the reptiles, leeches and vultures of the American plaintiffs bar sued ABB some years ago. This is big-time crisis where you have huge disruption, in your industry, and Shell had one too. The reserves declaration crisis, huge, mega, big ticket disruption.
Let's just get back to that question, Chad. I want to ask you what you think the most important was of those three. Please don't tell me all three.
No, adaptability, I think would be, and I think the other two are how you do a good job of adaptability. I think they're actually enabling characteristics to make it happen. About 10 years ago in the U.S., across all industries, we did a study of how do you deal with the next crisis, how the big thing is going to come across. So we tried to anticipate the next big crisis. We concluded it was impossible. And what we did find from looking at a number of crises and companies that had done pretty well and governments done well, if they had resilient, strong systems and people were well-trained and dedicated to the company, you could manage through most anything. If you spend all your time trying to guess what the next crisis is going to be, you'll miss it, because at the point in time we were doing it was before the financial crisis, and we missed that one totally with all of the list of things.
So have your finger on the pulse and not up testing the wind.
And develop your people. Put the skills into your people. Make sure they have the skills to do it.
So let's start taking some questions. This gentleman here. Thank you. Could we just wait for a microphone to come to you? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. This question is to Mr. Holliday. Do you see your industry being disrupted under the scenarios that you talked about, different alternative scenarios, say by 2050, when solar power and wind power and nuclear power, comes and takes up a lot of space? Do you see your oil and gas industry being disrupted quite significantly?
Yeah, I think absolutely there's going to be change. I think your time frame is very reasonable. We know there's going to be energy transition. We're focused on that. We still know exactly to what. Will it be the three you named? Absolutely. Could there be some others? There certainly could be. How big a role nuclear will play, we just don't know yet. How much will digitalization change the efficiency of the system? There's a lot of opportunities for efficiency improvement if we could do it the right way. So I think it's going to change. What we're trying to figure out is what role do we play in it. One of the most important, so where I spent last week was 3 days at Eco Marathon, where we had 117 teams of students from around the world came together to build a car that was energy efficient. Now, I have the wrong units of measure for this room, but generally in the U.S., a car is about, efficient car, 30 miles to the gallon, a really efficient car, maybe 60 miles to the gallon. The winner of this competition, 2,558 miles to the gallon with a human being in it. Now, you wouldn't want to necessarily drive it around the street yet, but nevertheless, listening to these young students and how they looked at the world, they are asking themselves different questions about the energy revolution.
Let's take another question from the audience. There's a lady with a hand up in the second row back. Thanks.
Hey, I'm Maikki Sipinen from Helsinki, and myself, I have worked for 3 years in a stone crushing company, actually, but by my peers, that is considered quite an unconventional choice. And on your disruption journey, you are going to need very many young people from different areas and different backgrounds, and you are going to be competing with startups and other industries that are considered more digital and maybe more agile. So is this a potential hazard in your industry, and how are you going to tackle it?
Bert Hess.
Well, certainly. I mean, we know the challenge. You mentioned startups, younger people coming up. We follow that very closely, and there are in our industry right now, as we speak, there are newcomers, a lot of newcomers. We have to adapt to a different landscape where there will be more companies, easy entrance into the markets. It's no secret that the cement markets, if you look at them 40, 50 years ago, were rather difficult to penetrate. There were a few players who dominated the markets, and now we have to adapt to a different competition scenarios. including, as you mentioned, younger people, startups, much lower cost base, more agile in the way they're doing business. So we're following that very closely.
Can I ask both of our panelists, just very briefly, aside from the industry, the individual sectors of industry that you're both involved in, which sectors of industry do you think will suffer the, dare I say, the Nokia clamshell moment, the misstep of not embracing a new trend? Is there a particular sector in industry that you think is, at risk of that? Chad?
I think there are two technologies that we've identified over the last 15 years that I think will change the world in a major way, biotechnology being one of them. I think with biotechnology, we'll be able to make living things so much stronger, we won't need chemicals to back them up. So I think that's a fundamental change. If anybody's not paying attention to how that could impact their industry, they're missing a point. And the other one's nanotechnology, the science of really small stuff and be able to control. I think it's going to make a tremendous change in the world. And if I had to say where we are on both of those, biotechnology, we're 20% of the way there, and nanotechnology, 5% of the way there. So I'd watch out for both of those.
Bert Hess, is there any particular sector you would be concerned about not embracing certain trends?
Well, if I look at, for example, at the healthcare industry, certainly big changes there. In the food industry, I mentioned already, where the trend is to go away from sugar, big time, to address the issues of obesity, to make sure that food in the future will contribute to your well-being, to your health. That's, for example, why Nestle went into the skin care business, because we are of the opinion that if we look ahead, years ahead, the skin is the biggest organ of the human being, and the way you treat your skin will have a huge influence on your well-being. This is certainly an industry. Medical care was mentioned. Industries that have to watch out. I mean, in the building industry, we are conscious of the fact that there need to be developments, new technologies, lighter products. I mean, there are a lot of industries that you can think will have to adapt to new trends.
Let's take two more questions from the audience. Oh, we've got quite a few. Madam with the white shirt will take your question, and then Sir with the blue shirt will take your question at the same time. Thanks.
I would like to know up to which extent you're both working with third parties and NGOs concerning recycling, climate questions, and environmental questions.
Okay.
So extensively working with a broad range of NGOs, have many forums where we seek input. We have joint projects together with multiple NGOs. What we find is that's very helpful in the problem-solving stage. And also to identify issues we have going on. We actually take groups of our board to actually meet with the leaders of NGOs so they can ask the questions directly and influence us. We think they're a great antenna as to what's going on in the world, and we listen greatly.
Let's take a question from the lady with the white shirt here in the front, please. And then we'll take a question from the gentleman. Here, sorry, excuse me, just here. Thank you.
Schneeberger from Switzerland. I have a question for Mr. Holliday. Do you see the deregulation in energy sector by Trump administration as a positive or a negative disruption, especially for your business?
The energy industry has to work to the highest environmental standards. And I believe regulation is good because we need every operator working to those standards. Companies like Shell and Exxon and BP will operate to high standards anyway. But I'm concerned that if regulations are pushed down, particularly in some of the shale operations, that would be a step in the wrong direction for the industry, because as problems happen, I served on the Secretary of Energy's advisory board that recommended a lot of the regulations around shale today. So I think they're solid regulations and actually could be tightened in some places.
Let's take one question from the gentleman with the white shirt here. Could you raise your hand, please, sir? There we go. Thanks.
Thank you. So as your company is basically being based on supplying energy or construction materials, but you're also simultaneously working on increasing the efficiency and finding new ways to better do this, how happy would you be if tomorrow energy efficiency or the efficiency to supply construction materials is increased by 50%?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part.
I didn't hear it very well either. I'm sorry, could you...
So the thing is, like, your business is based on supplying energy respective construction materials, right? But you're also working on increasing energy efficiency. You're working on having more efficient ways to build construction materials, to figure out how to build buildings. So if tomorrow energy efficiency would be increased by 50%, how happy would you be about that?
Well, obviously, the efficiency of our products, or energy efficiency, is a huge topic on our agenda. Well, you talked about environmental issues. We are sad to say, but we're the world's second biggest producer of CO2. We constantly try to improve that through new technologies, through totally innovative ways to capture CO2, and the efficiency of how we produce our products and the efficiency of our products, of the buildings, for example, at the end of the day, is probably not the number one topic of our research.
Now,
there's tremendous potential. I don't know if I'd go 50%, but I'd go 30 to 50%. There are materials that absorb heat during the day, release it at night. You can design the chemistry so they operate differently in a cold environment versus a hot environment. There's ways you can wrap the buildings totally differently. I think what we have to do is make sure the economic incentives are there for people to make the investments early on during that process. So that's what's probably missing as much as the actual technology itself.
Now, we've come to the end of our time on this panel, but I do want to make sure I do get in a question from the world of Twitter. And there's somebody called Joshua Gantz who's asked a very pertinent question here for you, Chas Holliday. Will the internal combustion engine be discontinued? And I suppose the continuation to that question is, if so, when? That's the ultimate disruptive question for your industry, isn't it?
Well, yeah, someday it'll be. But
could you be a little bit
narrow
more
that down a little more? No. but so we need to make the internal combustion engine much more efficient than it is today. But we have to have a massive change in the energy system. So if we could make it much more, it probably plays a role. So I must tell a simple story. So my dad started out in the ice business, the frozen stuff. And that's when you actually delivered ice, blocks of ice and things like that. And he was progressing very well in the company. But he looked around and said, I don't think this industry has that much left. So he looked around, there's refrigeration coming on, and he does that. So he concluded ice was going out of style, would not exist, and he started a refrigeration business with Carrier. The ice is still here today. So it's in those niche applications, we still need ice. So there might be niche applications where we need an internal combustion engine. So I wouldn't rule anything out, but I think the way energy is dealt with by the middle of the century will be quite different than we know it today.
On that prediction, I'd like to thank my panelists for the first part of this panel. Chad Holliday from Royal Dutch Shell, thank you very much, and also Beat Hess from LafargeHolcim.
Thank you.
Thank you.